Star Trek Online, a space-themed free-to-play MMO released on PC in 2010, with its free-to-play relaunch following in 2012. With our last outing covering Neverwinter, I wanted to cover the other MMO offering from developers Cryptic Studios, with their Star Trek-based MMORPG. As the galaxy shared the same fate as the high fantasy Neverwinter, today we take a look at the new player experience, and just what Star Trek Online has to offer its players in 2022. I'm Mitch Mannix, and this is Star Trek Online in 2022. As always, our adventure starts at the character creation, where Cryptic showcases a highly in-depth toolset for customizing your character. A wide variety of crazy-looking races are available from the Star Trek universe. From your typical humans to alien races, sporting forehead testicles, built-in harmonicas, and ear brows. This species looks kinda cool. I wonder what his origin story is. Okay, that makes sense. Now, it's time to shape ourselves an adventurer worthy of the epic, dangerous, and complex world of Star Trek. Introducing Strasbourg. Oh dear lord, what have I done? If you can believe it, this monstrosity is the diet version compared to other versions, but we don't talk about those. So with our character created, our faction selected, we dive into our beginnings with Starfleet. Our journey begins at the Starfleet Training Academy as a soon-to-be graduating student catching up with our classmates and discussing the upcoming assignment to ship duty.
There you are!
Oh god, and there you are. Exploring the first area, as with Neverwinter, the game does show its over 10-year-long lifespan with its visuals, as well as its facial animations, but it does well enough to set the scene with its environments, along with its many inhabitants.
But I would honestly say that the Mark II is the superior of the Uplings, as we've tested many of them over the past couple of weeks.
After getting acclimatized with our surroundings, we are tasked with completing a set of training courses serving as tutorials for some of the game's core mechanics, and we are shown around the game's UI. It turns out that we are a star student and have been offered the job of First Officer on our first deployment with Starfleet. Only the ceremonial toast sits ahead of our journey to the stars, so Strasbourg prepares himself and takes in the last moments at the Academy.
He's not even banned. Wait. What is that?
So off we set to the USS Perm, with Strasbourg literally hovering out of his seat in excitement. As you may have guessed, Star Trek Online lets you give custom names to your ships, which is proudly displayed for all others to see, adding a nice bit of customization. It's only a few minutes into our service as First Officer when the ship is set upon by Klingon invaders, and it's up to Strasbourg and co. to fight them off. It's here where we see the first string in Star Trek Online's bow when it comes to its combat. As with Neverwinter, I'm pleasantly surprised to see that it's far more complex and intuitive than I expected. Ground combat is either played in a typical MMO fashion, or with more of a focus on the over-the-shoulder Mass Effect style, with manual aiming for your weapons as opposed to simply clicking on the targets to engage. Crouching will grant a defensive bonus, and Cryptic Studios' mainstay flanking makes another appearance to further deepen the ground combat experience, along with dodge rolling. The early experience with the combat was good, and it felt good to work my way through the ship, taking on our enemies and showing the Klingons what a real forehead looks like. With the invaders dealt with, we find out that the Klingons have captured our captain, who nobly falls in battle.
Make me proud!
Oh, for God's sake, just the state of that is the ultimate drama killer. With the captain down for the count, we take up the helm and give chase to the Klingons, and are introduced to the other side of combat within Star Trek Online, of course being space battles, which again has a fair amount of nuance to it, with positioning and prioritizing power allocation being a factor, while blasting foes with an array of abilities and weaponry. With the introductory quest complete, we finally beam down to one of the larger hubs in the game for our opportunity for upgrades, our next mission, and with another chance to freak out the player base. We grab our next mission and begin working our way through the game's PvE content to level up and get a look at what's on offer. Each larger section of PvE content is split into episodes with their own story to tell. These include a mix of ground and space combat, coupled with ticking off of objectives and solving puzzles. The puzzles in particular were nice to see to break up the gameplay, interweaving with this sci-fi setting, solving code locks and managing ship systems during missions. During my time playing through the missions, I have to say that although a little hit and miss with the blander missions putting out fires, setting off alarms, there were some standout experiences, such as being captured and having to fight my way off a desert planet, fighting in an alien coliseum, and disguising myself as the enemy to go deep behind enemy lines.
That you're a Klingon now. Try not to look too out of place.
Lol. The zones themselves and the planets vary quite a bit in size, but never come close to the much larger expanses found in more recent games of the same type. What is nice to see is the amount of alternative locations themselves, switching things up enough to sell the idea of jumping from zone to zone in the wider universe. The stories again are a little inconsistent with just how gripping they end up playing out, but I'm sure that someone who is much more of a fan of Star Trek as opposed to me, whose knowledge of Star Trek mostly consists of references made by Eddie Izzard, would get a lot more out of them. Not to mention the fact that I suspect Strasbourg himself didn't really exactly help in this department.
Yes, Captain? Understood.
The game's characters feel a little like they were being directed by two rivaling siblings, with some convincing performances, sitting alongside performances from voice talent sounding like they were barely awake, with even sounding moment to moment like they were voiced by two completely different people.
The Empire will prevail.
No one is allowed to use this console.
With actual Leonard Nimoy voicing some of the game's core plot points, and some good writing where it counts, it overall does a good job at telling stories in the Star Trek universe, as well as gifting a laugh or two, even if unintentional.
I'll never let those green pirates have the Azura. Please, take my crew to...
Well, this is a little bit awkward. While leveling through the game, the player will get access to various upgrades in the form of personal gear for you and your ground crew, as well as ship components to augment your mobility and combat skills. These upgrades are coupled with a skill tree, again for both ground and ship, acting mostly to simply buff the player as they progress through the game, but also traits available for a far more in-depth focus on combat styles and other benefits. Other progression can be found in the game's officer system, which covers bridge officers, which are more like companions, and can be assigned as ground team members, as well as providing buffs during space combat. And duty officers, which can be collected and sent out on missions for materials, as well as servicing as the game's crafting mechanics. Unlike with Neverwinter, this system feels like it fits a little bit more in the setting, and I can imagine gives the game a fair amount of longevity, leveling up and collecting all manner of staff for your adventures. You can even customize and wander around your own ship's interior to check out the staff and explore. Oop, someone needs the toilet. Or maybe he's just in a hurry to drop a like on the video. What a legend! Promote him immediately! Given the game is over a decade old, I can't say that a huge amount of focus has been seen on bringing the game up to date with its more contemporary competition, and some bugs can still be found. Highlights such as some highly confusing NPC pathing, NPC's own clothes bugging out with hilarious results, and Strasbourg getting stuck in the terrain and all of his NPC companions deciding to jump 12 feet in the air to try and get him out, or celebrate, I'm not quite sure. An MMO wouldn't be complete without group activities, and although not the largest collection by any standards, Star Trek Online does have both ground-based and ship-based cooperative missions to play through in a group dungeon format. Very much on the short side, and with the space encounters specifically, I was more times than not completely at a loss of what to do or what was happening, as can get a tad clusterfucky for new players, and I wouldn't imagine the dungeon content being something that would keep players coming back time and time again, without some heavy reward incentive, and a chance to get a look at other players' imaginings of a Star Trek adventurer, like Strasbourg here. Logging into the game, you can just see him over there in the dark. Even the game's ashamed of him. On the PvP side of things, I once again spent an age and a day in a queue with no dice, and after speaking with a few veteran players, it seems like the PvP died a bit of a death over the years, with many not playing the game mode at all. I don't want to sound too much like a broken record with the last video covering Cryptic Studios' other MMO, Neverwinter, but Star Trek Online suffers from a lot of the same shortcomings, but not all of them. There is once again heavy monetization giving players with a fat wallet the ability to buy and boost their way all the way up to the endgame, with shiny upgrades, levels, and a planet-cracking ship. The jankiness of the game that feels like it could really do with some touching up does take away from the experience of someone looking to truly immerse themselves in the Star Trek universe, as well as being a constant reminder of the game's age. I said last time that Neverwinter ultimately paled in comparison to other more contemporary offerings, and the same could definitely be applied here. EVE Online, for example, makes the space exploration in this game look like a child's birthday party, and if it's group-based action sci-fi combat you're after, then there's a list as long as my arm for far more worthwhile experiences. Where Star Trek Online does do well though, is pulling all of these elements into one place. Yes, the individual arms aren't as strong as its competition, but in my time with the game at least, I battled through a city on foot, calling in airstrikes on groups of invaders, went cross-eyed trying to save groups of survivors in a 5-man co-op mission, fully customized the USS UFO Yeah, and got chased around it a little later by a non-combat pet I had accidentally summoned and didn't realize.
What is that? What is that? What is that?
What I'm saying here is that the new player experience as a package is one that you won't see in many other places. So if you're super into Star Trek, could give you a lot of bang for your buck, especially since it's free to play. Grabbing a mate or two and playing through the game's episodes can provide some fun, upgrading your ships and setting out together, as long as it's not taken too seriously. As when you start to look at Star Trek Online under the scope of a serious MMO, pitting it up against the more popular offerings today, it simply doesn't stack up in comparison, sadly, like its high fantasy younger sibling. Give this one a look if you're super rock hard on Star Trek, or simply fancy a new experience with a friend or two, but as the next great MMO experience to call home, that one will most likely remain elsewhere out among the stars. Thank you so much for watching. Have you played Star Trek Online? I'm keen to get your thoughts down in the comments. Please drop the video a like if you enjoyed it, and consider subscribing to the channel for all sorts of RPG greatness. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys in the next one.